Well, meanwhile, men between the ages of 25 and 60 can be mobilized for military service in Ukraine. Recently, the government launched a new initiative aimed at encouraging younger men, those not yet eligible for the draft, to volunteer for the armed forces. The programme offers short-term financial options and short-term service options and financial incentives in exchange for some of the most dangerous jobs on the front. Max Zander filed this report.
They have their whole lives ahead of them, but they're ready to risk it all. These men, 18 to 24 years old, are training to become infantry soldiers. This is their first week, and in less than 2 months, they'll be on the battlefield, face to face with the Russians.
There are various ways to attack.
They're part of a special program encouraging men below the draft age to join Ukraine's armed forces. It comes with a signing bonus and with an end date after 12 months of service. But there's another thing that motivates them.
Roughly speaking, this is revenge. And defending your country, it's 2 in 1.
He is planning on staying on after his 1-year contract ends. That's also in the interest of the armed forces, who are dealing with an army where the average soldier is in his 40s. Yuri, on the other hand, has other plans. He wants to become an airline pilot, but first he wants to fight, against his family's will.
Well, my mother cried and said that I was stupid for coming here. I followed in the footsteps of my father and my 3 older brothers.
The family fled occupied territory during the full-scale invasion. Yuri seeks revenge. His father is missing, 1 brother dead.
He was killed by Russian soldiers when he was going to work. We heard that a sniper on a roof killed him.
The young fighters who sign up to the program get a bonus of 1 million hryvnia, which is more than 21,000 euros on top of their salary. Even though it's only half of what some regions in Russia offer, it's a lot of money for the young men.
I think young people will be interested in it. It's combat experience with financial assistance. A lot of options from the state. Yes, I think that it will motivate many, and many will go.
In this program, soldiers cannot choose where they will serve. They're signing up to become riflemen, man-machine guns, and grenade launchers, positions where physical strength is necessary and which are amongst the most dangerous. But they're learning from experienced fighters, and we're being told the training is constantly evolving.
The job of an infantryman, the position of either a sniper or a grenade launcher, carries some risks. That is, we have to explain to these people that this is unfortunately war. There is no war without losses. Therefore, we prepare them both psychologically and physically, and provide them skills in their specialities.
45 days of basic training are followed by 20 days to specialize. Little time to turn youths into battle-ready soldiers and prepare them mentally for what may come.
Don't give up. It'll be tough and it'll be uncomfortable. I personally promise you that. But if you learn and accept what we're passing on to you, what helped us survive, you won't be cannon fodder.
So far, only about 500 young men have signed up. A few thousand others have shown interest in the program. In the 4th year of war, even with a time limit, these new soldiers are among the few who are ready to take the risk.
Well, let's consider this with Marina Miron. Marina is a military analyst at the Defence Studies Department at King's College London. She joins us from Munich. Welcome back, Marina. We'll come to that Ukrainian scheme in just a moment. First of all, let's talk about the draft that Ukraine has. They've had a draft since 2022, but it's been hampered by public mistrust. What's gone wrong?
Good evening, Phil. Well, the problem here is the draft law and the exemptions to the draft. So every single time there were modifications to the draft, there was a public discord with what was modified in the law, meaning that it started to create a wedge in the society, because those who earn a certain amount of money would be, say, exempt from the draft. So you can imagine the division in the society where people who don't have those earnings would be very upset about it and saying, well, you send the poor to the front. And the reason for that modification, for instance, was the fact that somebody still has to invest into the economy. And so the reasoning was, if a person earns more, it means they pay more taxes. And in order to be able to afford an army, you need money. You need people, of course, as well, but you need to equip and outfit those people. You need to train those people. You need to pay them salaries and so on, medical care. And so that was a problem. The problem, again, another problem began with disabilities or sick people who have some sort of illnesses. So those regulations have changed as well.
Right.
And so people started looking for ways to dodge the draft, essentially. And we have seen videos of people unwilling to be recruited. So that has created an internal problem within Ukrainian society.
And now we have this incentive scheme for younger Ukrainians, which we just saw in the report. Can you see this sort of scheme working?
Well, it has been introduced in February 25, and unfortunately, it has not worked as expected by the Ukrainian government. Yes, Ukraine managed to recruit some volunteers, but the problem is that based on interviews with those who have been recruited, mostly it was about financial incentives offered. But then those recruited have also reported that one thing is seeing the war on TV or maybe in computer games. Another thing is participating in the war. And so that 1 year contract is, of course, great to earn some money and to get some benefits. But for some, the money wasn't enough to undergo such suffering, because the war is really tough, and especially considering the fact that Ukraine has a lot of shortages in terms of equipment and also some setbacks on the battlefield that have been continuing steadily since the end of the counteroffensive. With some exceptions. And so the situation on the battlefield is not very favorable. That's why people are less incentivized to go and fight, especially also with the peace negotiations now going on. So there might be some hope that something might work out, like a ceasefire, perhaps.
Right. And a word then about the age profile of Ukraine's army, which has been described as tired and aged. The average age of Ukrainian soldiers is 45. Does that present any challenges for Ukraine on the battlefield?
Well, on the one hand, you have older people on the battlefield, but some Ukrainian sources argue, for instance, that recruiting younger people from age of 18 to 25, that is a way too early. From a Western perspective, of course, if you look at the United States, for instance, it's very incomprehensible why that would be so, but for Ukraine, that is different. And so the reasoning here is that those older than 25 are much more mature. But of course, physical agility declines when you age. You have more chronic illnesses. So yes, it can be it can have a negative impact depending on the task you have to fulfill on the battlefield. On the other hand, recruiting those aged between 18 and 25, it's a very small portion, I think about 4% of the population. So it's not going to boost the numbers that much, but it can create societal problems.
Okay, thanks for talking us through that, Marina. Marina Miron from King's College London.
Thank you for having me.
Now, for more, let's bring in Jenny Mathers. She's an expert in Russian politics and security and a senior lecturer in the Department of International Politics at Aberystwyth University. Now, what comes to mind when you look at these efforts to boost the military in Ukraine, especially the fact that the voluntary measures to target the youth initially have been receiving a rather lackluster response?
Yes, Ukraine is having a problem with personnel recruitment for the armed forces. There's no doubt about it. They've had, problems with sort of corruption scandals in terms of men who've been conscripted, obtaining fraudulent medical certificates, claiming disabilities. There have been, lots of attempts by men to leave the country illegally. So yes, there is a lot of resistance. Well, yes, a lot of resistance. It's fair to say to service in the armed forces now that this war is, dragging into a fourth year. It's, more and more costly in terms of human lives. So yes, the Ukrainians are having to be more resourceful when it comes to finding different ways to try and encourage and entice young men to give up their civilian lives and to join the armed forces.
Now, can you actually compare this conscription efforts in Ukraine with what we've been observing in Russia?
Sure. So Russia is also having difficulties in recruiting enough soldiers to fight the war in the way that it's fighting it, which is very wasteful of human lives. Strictly speaking, conscripts are not allowed to serve in combat zones. Conscripts are the young men who serve for 1 year and just get some training. But the Russian state has been mobilizing older men since September 2022, and they serve on an open-ended basis. So there's no end to their service until the war ends, presumably, or until the state changes its mind. And then there's the efforts to find volunteers. And this has been a lot more successful in Russia than trying to sort of mobilize people involuntarily, because Russia has increased the amount of money that they're offering to soldiers in terms of salaries, but also increasing the amount of benefits that military families get. And of course, if the soldier dies or is seriously wounded, then the family gets even more money. And so families who are living in socioeconomic difficulty, particularly those in the regions of the country which are less well developed and have fewer job opportunities, for those families, military service for the menfolk looks like a pretty good deal. It's something that the families need in terms of the money, and it's a sort of a reasonably well respected way for a young man or an older man to earn money for the family.
Now, war is always about numbers, not only, but also about numbers. And Ukraine's military has just less than 1 million people in arms, whereas Russia has some 1.5 million active personnel. How big of an advantage is this for Russia?
So clearly, numbers do tell a story, and it would be foolish to suggest that Russia doesn't enjoy some advantages through sheer scale of the human personnel that it's able to put onto the battlefield. But I think we also have to recognize that there are questions around motivation and training and skills. So, a fair number of the people that Russia is putting onto the battlefield are former prisoners who are looking for pardons. Some of them are much older men in their 40s, 50s, even 60s. Some of them are not very physically fit. So there's a whole wide variety of different kinds of people in this 1.5 million. And of course, we have to remember that hundreds of thousands of men are believed to have left Russia to avoid service in the military. So it's definitely suffering in terms of its overall population. So there are advantages to having larger numbers, but I think we have to remember as well that the Ukrainians are very good at ingenuity, at creative solutions, and coming up with interesting and surprising actions and dimensions, as we've seen just in the last few days.
Now, if the current peace efforts between Russia and Ukraine fail, who do you think will have the upper hand going forward on the battlefield?
I think a lot of it depends on the allies of both countries, because what we've seen is that Russia is calling upon North Korea and Iran, for example, for weapons. It's been using North Korean soldiers, and now we hear Chinese soldiers as well. Whereas, the Ukrainians obviously are not using the soldiers of NATO member states, but they're getting a lot of military aid and support. So I think a great deal comes down to the allies as well as to the two countries themselves and how much the allies are willing to put in to support, either Russia or Ukraine.
Jenny Mathers, now, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.